The celestial archive of Aurelian Prime was said to hold the knowledge of 10,000 civilizations. Its halls glowed with living light. Its machines could predict stellar collapse, cure plagues, and map unborn futures. And yet in the center of all that brilliance, High Chancellor Aaron Sol stood completely still, staring through a transparent wall of energy at two small figures lying on a floating medical platform. They were his children, twin heirs of a dynasty that ruled half the known systems. Surrounded by humming instruments and silent guardians, they did not move. No breath he could hear, no fingers he could hold. The doctors had used every technology known to the stars, and still the verdict was the same. Their minds were alive, but their bodies would not respond. For the first time in his life, the man who commanded fleets and bent worlds to treaties felt utterly powerless. Aaron's summons had come at the worst possible moment. A border war was hours from igniting, and only his presence could prevent it. Billions of lives depended on his decision. Duty demanded he leave immediately, but every instinct in him screamed to stay. To sit beside his children and wait for a miracle that science could not promise. The physicians assured him the monitoring systems were perfect, that every neural signal would be tracked, every fluctuation reported instantly. Still, there was one detail that made his chest tighten. During his absence, the twins' ward would be maintained by a civilian support worker, a caretaker from Earth, a human, species known across the coalition for being emotional, impulsive, and dangerously attached. Aaron had heard the stories. Humans who bonded too deeply, who crossed boundaries, who acted before thinking. A tase, but there was no alternative. The war could not wait, and the children could not be moved. So with a fractured heart and a mask of authority, the Chancellor turned away, trusting the most precious things in his life to someone the system barely noticed. Mara Ellison adjusted the strap of her utility bag as she stepped into the restricted wing of the archive. She had worked maintenance and support her entire adult life. Power conduits, sanitation grids, archive halls, quiet work, invisible work. At 50 Earth years old, her hair was streaked with gray, her hands rough from decades of labor. This assignment was different, too quiet, too important. The room opened before her, and she froze. Two children lay suspended in soft fields of light, their faces peaceful, their eyes closed. They looked fragile, too small for the machines surrounding them. Mara swallowed hard. 20 years ago, she had stood in a hospital room on Earth, watching her own son fade while doctors spoke in calm, practiced voices. She had left the planet not long after, running from memories she could never escape. Just clean Mara, she whispered to herself. That's all. As she worked, she noticed small things the machines didn't react to. A slight tilt of one child's neck, a tension in the other's fingers. It's nothing alarming, nothing urgent, but something felt wrong. The readouts were stable, yet the boy's breathing pattern flickered unevenly. Mara stood still, heart pounding. She knew the rules. No contact. No interference. Touching a chancellor's child without authorization could end her career, or worse, but she also knew what it looked like when a body was uncomfortable, when someone needed to be adjusted, not treated. Slowly, carefully, she reached into the field and supported the child's head, shifting it just enough to ease the strain. The breathing steadied almost immediately. There, she whispered, that's better. What Mara didn't know was that light years away, Aaron's soul was watching. His command chamber was silent as the live feed played across his personal display. His breath caught when he saw the human's hands inside the field. His guards tensed, waiting for his order. But then he saw how she moved, slowly, gently, like someone who had done this before, not out of training, but out of care. And he saw the result. The monitor stabilized. His child looked peaceful. Aaron said nothing. He watched. The next day, Mara returned with something tucked into her bag, a small, old audio device. She set it on a shelf and activated it softly. A simple melody filled the room. A song her mother used to sing. I don't know if you can hear me, she said quietly, wiping a console, but I'll talk anyway. She cleaned as she spoke about the stars, about how big the universe was and how scary it could be.
Oh.
How someone loved them enough to watch from far away. She didn't see the girl's fingers twitch at the sound of her voice, but the Chancellor did. Days passed, then weeks. Mara talked every visit. She played music. She read aloud from old Earth books. She learned about Aurelian culture and spoke their language, clumsy but sincere. She adjusted blankets, repositioned limbs, stayed longer than required. Slowly, impossibly, the twins began to respond. A flutter of eyelids, a soft sound. One day, the boy opened his eyes, just for a moment. The medical council ran diagnostics again and again. Nothing had changed. No new treatment, no new code. Only the human. Aaron returned without announcement. He entered the ward to find Mara sitting on the floor, reading softly, while the children watched her. Alive, aware. His voice shook as he spoke. "What have you done?" Mara stood quickly, fear flooding her face. She apologized at once, said she'd never meant to break rules, said she just couldn't leave them alone. Alone? Aaron echoed. They had everything. They had machines. She replied gently. What they needed was someone to be there. The doctors called it neuroactivation through consistent sensory stimulation. Aaron called it a miracle. He offered Mara wealth, titles, relocation to the inner worlds. She refused all of it. She asked only to stay, to keep doing what she was doing. Across the coalition, medical protocols changed. Presence was no longer. Optional touch was no longer forbidden. But for Aaron's soul, the change was simpler. It was watching a tired human woman sing softly to his children, reminding the universe that even when logic fails, care still matters. And sometimes that is enough. In the months that followed, the twins changed in ways no projection model could explain. Their movements were slow and uneven at first, but they were real. A finger curling around Mara's thumb, a soft sound when she spoke their names. Medical teams adjusted their expectations again and again, forced to admit that something fundamental had been missing from their calculations. The machines had kept the children alive, but Mara had given them a reason to stay awake. Physical. Therapy began, cautious and measured. Some days were setbacks. Some days nothing happened at all. Mara stayed anyway. She celebrated the smallest progress like it was a victory parade, and on the hard days, she simply sat beside them and talked, as if patience itself were a form of medicine. Aaron watched whenever he could, not as a chancellor, not as a ruler, but as a father learning how close he had come to losing everything. He noticed how the twins reacted differently to Mara than to anyone else, how their focus sharpened when she entered the room, how their bodies relaxed when she spoke. One evening, long after the staff had gone, he stood beside her as she adjusted. A support brace. "Why them?" he asked quietly. "You could have asked for reassignment." Mara didn't look up, because once she said someone walked out of a room like this and my son never woke up. I promised myself I'd never be that person again. The story spread, first as a medical anomaly, then as a cultural shock. Humans were invited to consult across coalition hospitals, not as experts in technology, but as experts in presence. Some species resisted, some mocked the idea, but results were hard to argue with. Recovery rates improved. Patient stress decreased. Outcomes shifted. What began as a quiet act of compassion became a standard practice written into policy. Still, none of that mattered much to Mara. She measured success in smaller ways, a laugh, a grip, a child sleeping peacefully instead of lying still. One morning, months later, the twins stood for the first time with assistance. Their legs trembled, their balance uncertain, but they stood. Aaron covered his mouth, unable to speak. Mara cried openly, kneeling in front of them, encouraging, steady, real. They fell moments later, exhausted, smiling. It was enough. The galaxy would remember this as a turning point in medicine. A reminder that progress is not only built with tools and data, but with stubborn care and shared silence. Humanity had always been known for its contradictions. Logical yet emotional, advanced yet impulsive. But perhaps this was their quiet strength. When the universe said there is nothing more to be done, humans stayed. They sat, they spoke. And sometimes against all reason, that changed everything. Years later, visitors to the Celestial Archive would sometimes pause outside a sunlit chamber near the inner gardens. Inside, two young figures practiced walking along a low railing, their steps uneven but determined. A human woman sat nearby, offering steady encouragement, her voice calm and familiar. She had grown older, slower, but she'd never missed a day. To the twins, she was not a caretaker or a symbol or a miracle. The one who stayed, Aaron's soul, no longer ruled from a distance. He scheduled his councils around therapy sessions, his treaties around shared meals. Power had not left him, but it no longer defined him. Watching his children struggle and succeed had changed the way he saw leadership. Strength, he learned, was not control. It was presence. It was choosing to remain when leaving was easier. Other species tried to replicate the human method with procedures and checklists. Some succeeded, others failed. What they eventually understood was that it could not be automated. Compassion could not be scheduled. Presence could not be outsourced to machines. It required time, attention, and the willingness to feel pain without guarantee of reward. Humans had never been the strongest or the smartest species in the galaxy, but they were relentless in one way. They refused to give up on each other. Mara never spoke at conferences, never wrote papers. When asked why she thought the children survived, she always gave the same answer. I talked to them, she said. I listened. I treated them like they mattered. To her, it was not philosophy, it was instinct. On the anniversary of the twins' first steps, Mara played the same old song she had brought on her second day. The melody was worn, imperfect, and human. The twins sat beside her, purring softly, leaning into her warmth. Beyond the walls of the archive, stars burned and wars ended, and civilizations rose and fell. But in that small room, the universe felt quiet and kind, and somewhere deep within the records of 1,000 worlds, a simple truth was logged at last. Sometimes it responds to love. Long after the reports were archived and the policies rewritten, the story continued in quieter ways. In morning routines, in evening songs, in tired smiles and steady hands. The twins grew, slowly but surely, learning not just how to move, but how to trust the world around them. They learned that when they struggled, someone would wait, that when they fell, someone would help them rise. Those lessons stayed with them far longer than any therapy ever could. Mara sometimes wondered what her life might have been if she had never taken that assignment. If she had stayed invisible, cleaning halls no one remembered. The thought, no longer carried regret. Loss had brought her to the stars, but love had given her a reason to stay. She still missed her son. That never faded. But in caring for the twins, she felt that pain soften into something gentler, something useful. When the twins were old enough to speak clearly, they asked her once why she had helped them. Mara thought for a long moment before answering. "'Cause no one should wake up alone," she said. They nodded, as if that made perfect sense. Galaxy would go on debating technology, strategy, and progress. It always would. But tucked inside those vast discussions was a small, stubborn idea that refused to disappear. That healing is not only about fixing what is broken, sometimes it is about showing up, again and again, even when the outcome is uncertain. But so, the lesson endured. Not carved into monuments or etched into laws, but passed quietly from room to room, from voice to voice. When everything else fails, stay, speak, care, because sometimes that is what saves a life. As time moved forward, the twins began to understand the weight of their own story. They heard it whispered by aides and spoken carefully by teachers. Always softened, always incomplete. They knew they had once been fragile, once surrounded by silence and machines. But what stayed with them most was not the fear. It was the memory of a voice, presence. A human who never treated them like a problem to solve, but like people who deserved patience. Mara aged quietly alongside them. Her steps grew slower, her hands less steady, but her place in their lives never changed. She was there for celebrations and setbacks, for triumphs and long, frustrating days when progress seemed to disappear. When asked why she never returned to Earth, she smiled and said she had already found her home. Aaron sometimes watched from a distance, careful not to interrupt. He had learned that love did not need to announce itself, it simply needed to remain. He often thought about the moment he had almost trusted everything to machines alone, about how close he had come to choosing efficiency over connection. The thought humbled him every time. One evening, as the stars outside the archive shifted into their slow night cycle, the twins sat beside Mara, listening as she hummed an old tune. It was the same melody that had once filled a silent room with hope. They leaned against her, warm and alive, and the sound carried softly through the chamber. The universe would never stop building faster machines or smarter systems. Progress would always chase perfection. But this story passed from one generation to the next, carried a quieter message, that even in the most advanced age, the simplest human acts still mattered. Stay, care. Do not turn away sometimes. That is how the impossible becomes possible. In later years, when the twins began taking part in council sessions as observers, they noticed something others did not. Leaders spoke of strength, of expansion, of safeguards and contingencies. But when discussions turned to hospitals, refugees, or disaster zones, the tone always shifted. Words like efficiency slowly made room for words like presence. No one said Mara's name out loud in those rooms, yet her influence was there all the same. Mara herself paid little attention to legacy. She still woke early, still hummed while preparing meals, still adjusted cushions and supports with the same quiet care. When her hands ached, she rested. When her voice cracked, she sang anyway. She had learned that perfection was never required, only sincerity. The twins grew taller, stronger, more confident. Their steps were not effortless, but they were theirs. They laughed easily. They questioned rules. They touched others without fear. When asked once what they remembered from before, they answered simply, "We remember someone stayed." As the years passed, new caretakers were trained under a different philosophy. They were taught procedures, yes, but also patience. They were reminded that silence could be frightening, that warmth mattered, that listening was not wasted time. Some struggled with this. Others embraced it fully. Those were the ones patience remembered. On a quiet evening, as the lights of the archive dimmed, Mara sat by the window, watching the stars she had once fled to. She felt tired in a way that was not painful. A good tired. The twins sat nearby, talking softly, alive in ways no machine had ever promised. The universe was still vast, still uncertain, still full of things no one could fix. But in that uncertainty, one truth had proven itself again and again. When faced with the choice to walk away or stay, stay. That choice, repeated enough times, could change everything. As the years unfolded, the celestial archive slowly transformed in ways no one had formally ordered. The halls were the same, machines still hummed with precision, but something softer had taken root. Visitors lingered longer in patient chambers. Caretakers spoke more, even when no response came back. Silence was no longer treated as empty. It was treated as shared. Mara became older than she ever expected to be. Her hair turned fully white, her back bent slightly, and her hands sometimes trembled when she lifted a cup. The twins noticed before she did. They adjusted their pace to match hers. They waited when she needed to rest. In helping her, they learned something important about strength. It was not about speed or perfection. It was about staying connected even as things changed. Aaron Soul stepped down from his role as Chancellor quietly. Chorus ceremonies, of course, and speeches filled with admiration. But his proudest moment did not come from any of that. It came one afternoon in the garden wing, watching his children walk beside a human woman who had once been invisible to the galaxy. He realized then that leadership had never been about command. It had been about care. Care had taught him more than power ever had. The twins grew into their identities slowly, shaped not just by their lineage, but by the patience they had been given. They chose paths that surprised many. They spoke often about access, about dignity, about what it meant to truly support life, rather than merely preserve it. When asked why these things mattered so much to them, they answered honestly, because we remember what it felt like to be seen. Mara knew her time was limited long before anyone else said it aloud. Her body grew tired more easily. Some days, she could only sit and listen. But she was never afraid. She had learned that being present did not always require doing. Sometimes, it was enough to simply exist beside someone. To share breath. To share space. On her last morning, at the archive, the twins sat with her as light filtered through the glass ceiling. She played the old song one more time, the melody slow and familiar. They held her hands, steady and warm. She smiled, her eyes bright despite the weariness. "You did well," she told them softly. "All of you." After she was gone, the room did not feel empty. It felt full. Full of memory, full of proof. The galaxy continued its endless motion. Stars burned out, new ones formed, technology advanced, systems evolved. But woven quietly through all of it was a lesson that refused to fade, that progress without compassion was incomplete, that healing required more than solutions, required people willing to stay when nothing else seemed to work. And so the story endured, not as a legend of miracles or heroes, but as a reminder. When faced with helplessness, choose presence. When faced with fear, choose care. Because sometimes, in a universe that insists nothing can be done, the simple act of staying is what changes everything.